All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, my name is Court Tompkins. I am CTO here at IP Configure, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about everything that is new in the latest release of Orchid VMS. That's going to be version 25.6. It was released towards the end of June, so maybe about 3 weeks ago. Got some exciting new features in there that I'd like to share with everybody. So just as a refresher, the Orchid ecosystem generally consists of two components. So you have an Orchid recorder, that's your NVR that's generally on-prem at your individual locations. Then you have a central management server, either Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid. If you're using our cloud services, you're using Orchid Hybrid. If you're hosting everything yourself, you're using Orchid Fusion. But everything we're talking about in this release presentation applies to both interfaces, whether you're using the central Fusion or hybrid portal or you're using the NVR on location. What we're going to discuss still applies unless I mention that it's maybe a specific Fusion or recorder feature. All right, so we're going to get right into it. One of the big new features in Orchid VMS 25.6 is that the Orchid user interface now supports automated time zone adjustments. So for some time, Orchid has notified users when they are viewing a camera that is attached to a server that is in a different time zone than the user's current time zone. So for example, I'm in Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time. If I were looking at a camera in Pacific Daylight Time before 25.6, we would get a little notice on the Pacific time player indicating that this player is 3 hours before the current time. We would see a little -3 there. That gave you some awareness that the time was different, but we got feedback from users that sometimes sort of doing that math in your head was just tedious. You had to know that, well, if it's currently noon here, the camera that I'm looking at that has the -3 on it, well, that's actually 9 a.m. their time. So beginning at 25.6, users can now automatically switch the time shown in the Orchid user interface, switch that timeline bar to show a different time zone, not necessarily show your local time, but you can show the time zone of the cameras that you're looking at. We're going to take a look at a live demo of that here in a second. Supporting this, we've also added time zone indicators sort of everywhere in the application because again, now that I have the ability to change what time zone I'm viewing based on the camera that I'm looking at, we want to be very clear about what time zone we're talking about. So on the Orchid timeline bar, on the Orchid export dialogues, other places in the application, we're not just going to give you the time, we're also going to give you the time zone abbreviation. Like here you see in this screenshot, time zone is EDT. So I know I'm looking at Eastern Daylight Time. This new time zone feature also has an active and a passive mode. So by default, the standard behavior is a passive mode where if I add a player to the stage in a different time zone, I'll see that little chip in the top left corner that tells me, hey, the time is different. Then I can click that and change the time zone of the Orchid user interface to the time zone of the camera that I'm looking at. However, we also have the ability to enable an active mode where that will happen automatically. If I'm in one time zone and then I add a new camera to the stage or a new video to the stage that's in a different time zone, we can have that automatically change to the time zone of the camera. All right, so let's take a look at what that might look like. So I am going to go to IP Configure's Orchid Hybrid demo site. This is on the latest 25.6 release. So I am going to log in. And right now I am, in fact, let me add a couple more cameras to the stage. I am looking at some cameras that are in Eastern time. Now, perhaps not great for this demo, I am also in Eastern time. So to better illustrate what's going on here, I am going to open up my Chrome debugger, and I am going to tell Chrome that I am actually in, let's see, London. So remember, I'm looking at cameras that are attached to an Orchid server that's in Eastern time. Let me refresh my browser. My browser is now going to think that my normal time zone is British Standard Time. And you'll notice I have a little pop-up here you may have seen, which says the time was automatically changed to EDT. And if I hover over any of the players on the stage, I see a little chip in the top left corner that indicates this player is 0 hours off from my current time. And that's because I'm in this mode where the time zone automatically synchronizes, but I can change that. So I'm going to click this 0 hour indicator. You'll notice I've got some information here. It shows me that the recorder's time zone is Eastern Daylight Time. My time zone, my fake time zone in this case, is British Standard Time. So I'm going to go back to British Standard Time. You'll notice this is my actual normal time zone, right? Based on how I have my browser set up. It is now, 7:06 p.m. British Standard Time. I can hover over my players. I get an indicator that they are actually 5 hours off from my current time. And if I want, I can change my time zone to now synchronize with the video that I'm looking at. And now here we see 2:07 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. But again, I've got this Orchid instance set up to automatically change that. So we can see that in action. If I clear my stage here, I have no players on the stage. So my timeline bar here at the bottom is going to automatically go back to my local time zone. But as soon as I add a new player on the stage that's in a different time zone, I'm going to drag it over to the stage. You'll notice that we've automatically changed to Eastern Daylight Time, and I have a little time zone indicator showing me that. All right, as we also saw in the slides, we now have these time zone indicators everywhere in the application. So for example, if I go to export video from this camera, even though my local time zone is different because I've set Orchid to now use the time zone of this camera, Eastern Daylight Time, my export times that I select here are showing EDT, showing the time zone that I have selected. So that's a big new user interface feature in 25.6 for our larger retail customers, customers with a bigger footprint, bigger geographic footprint. We think this is going to be really useful. It's something that we've had requests for some time. Customers that have large installations wanted to be able to have users get in, make sense of these different time zones a little more easily. So that is our new automatic time zone adjustment. As I mentioned, the passive mode is the default, where we'll just show the indicator, and then you have to click the indicator on the player to change your time zone. But administrators can move into that active mode, where as soon as I add a player to the stage, the time zone changes automatically. Yep, and that is the configuration property I use to set that. Now, in a large installation, it is possible that you might actually have 3 different selected time zones. You might have your time zone, you might have a player on the stage in a second time zone, and then you might have a third player on the stage that's in an active time, that's sort of the time zone that you're viewing in Orchid. So in that case, I've got a screenshot here of what that might look like. So I'm looking at a player that is in Mountain Time. My actual local time is in Eastern Time, but I've configured the Orchid UI to use Pacific Time because I'm looking at another player that's already on the stage in Pacific Time. So again, we can handle some really complicated scenarios where I've got players from all over the world on the stage, but just by clicking that dialog, I can synchronize my timeline bar so that I'm looking at the time of whatever camera I'm viewing in Orchid. All right, so that is the automatic time zone adjustment. Moving on, another pretty cool new user-facing feature in Orchid, and this is available in both Fusion and Recorder, as what the time zone feature was as well. Users can now create shareable links. So these shareable links include the exact stage layout, all of the cameras, as well as the positioning of those cameras in Orchid, and the current time that you're viewing. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So let me make a more interesting stage link here. Add a few more players to the stage. Let's see, I'm going to get a sort of a specific layout. And let me go back in time to a couple of days ago. So perhaps some incident happened here, something interesting, and I want to be able to share this exact view at this exact time with somebody else. So I'm going to pause on this incident. I can open up my camera bag, and there is a new button at the bottom of the camera bag next to the clear stage button, and that is a link to copy the stage URL to the clipboard. So now I have a link that I can share with anybody. They will need an Orchid login, but they don't have to be logged in to use the link. So let me show you what that looks like. I will sign out of Orchid. I am going to now paste that link in my browser. And again, as long as I am a user who is able to log in to Hybrid, as soon as I log in using that link that I pasted in the browser, I'm going to go to exactly the stage that we saved with the time. Now, the link that I share, the if a user has to log in to access that, if they're not already logged into Fusion or Hybrid, they will only see the cameras in that stage that they have access to. So this isn't really changing the sharing permissions. If I have access to 3 cameras in some privileged area and I create a stage link and send it to somebody who doesn't have access to view those cameras, when they go to this stage link, they'll see an empty stage. But again, as long as somebody has a login to Orchid and has the access to view live or recorded video from those cameras, the stage link will take them there. All right, so that is stage links, new in version 25.6. The final pretty big significant feature in Orchid 25.6, not really a user-facing feature, but an important feature, mostly for enterprise customers, but really for anybody who's has an external system that is interfacing, pulling video out of Orchid, and that's typically done through Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid's RTSP proxy. So beginning in 25.6, Orchid Fusion and Orchid Hybrid now provide a new standalone RTSP proxy server. Now, the RTSP proxy server, both the new standalone version in 25.6 and the older embedded version that Orchid Fusion and Orchid Hybrid have had for years now, really is a kind of a legacy endpoint. So it's a way for third-party integrations to pull live or recorded video from Orchid recorders, get that video outside of Orchid VMS and integrate it with some third-party system. Often these are maybe third-party analytics, alarm monitoring systems, those sorts of integrations. Now, the old RTSP server in Orchid was functional, worked well, but it was somewhat restricted. It was using an older media framework based on the way that this server was embedded inside Orchid Fusion and Orchid Hybrid itself. In order for that embedded server to be able to run on all of the different operating systems which Orchid Fusion supports, which is, going all the way back to Ubuntu 16.04, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, up to the very newest operating systems that we support now, like Ubuntu 24.04 and RHEL 9, latest versions of Red Hat. In order to bundle that RTSP server into Fusion itself, we were restricted to using some older streaming media frameworks that restricted the performance and the compatibility of the RTSP server, and also meant that it only worked with H.264 video. Orchid supports H.265 and AV1 and other codecs. So beginning in 25.6, we now have a new RTSP proxy, runs as a separate service, and it uses the latest version of GStreamer, an open source streaming media framework, and it provides excellent performance and compatibility with newer features such as AV1 and H.265. Orchid recently added support for AV1, so we want to make sure that our RTSP proxy, the way that third parties can get video out of Orchid, supports AV1 as well. Now, this new RTSP proxy really is going to be transparent to most people who are using the proxy. It's almost entirely transparent to administrators as well. So if you have a integration, an analytic, an alarm monitoring service that's using the Fusion RTSP proxy, nothing changes on that integration side. Now that you're on this latest and greatest 25.6 proxy, you might see better performance. You'll certainly see compatibility for newer codecs such as AV1 and H.265, but the endpoints, the way the proxy itself works, none of that has changed. So in an effort to not inadvertently break things, we have retained the old embedded server in Orchid Fusion, really just a fail-safe that will be removed in future releases, but it is still there if in the very unlikely chance you discover that maybe your legacy integration is not working with the new RTSP proxy, it is possible to disable and stop this new standalone RTSP proxy, re-enable the embedded proxy. Again, for all of our hosted customers on Orchid Hybrid, we have not encountered this. We don't expect to encounter it, but the old embedded proxy is still available. All right, so getting into some of the smaller new features in 25.6, system administrators can now define a mandatory access agreement. So Orchid hybrid users are probably familiar with the access agreement that you have to agree to before you log in. On-prem Orchid Fusion users can also specify their own access agreement. Obviously, that's common with enterprise users who want to bind their employees, bind their end users to some agreement, some set of policies before they access the system. It is now possible to force that agreement to pop up every single time you log in. So there's no longer the ability to check a box and accept the agreement and then log in. Administrators can now require that agreement pops up every single time you've logged in. That was a request from a couple of enterprise customers of IP Configure who run Orchid Fusion on-prem. So that is now a new option. So let's see, we've got some other small improvements in Orchid Fusion and Orchid Hybrid. So specifically, we have a much more scalable dialog for configuring system alerts on systems that have very large server or camera counts. So previously, as you were configuring camera alerts or server alerts, these are the alerts in Orchid that notify you if a camera goes down, if a server goes down, storage becomes degraded. If you wanted to generate alerts for specific servers and you had thousands of servers in your system, selecting those servers could be very tedious. So we now have a new dialog, which is the same dialog you find on the page where you go to configure camera groups, other parts of the application. This new dialog is now brought into the system alerts page, makes it much easier to select individual cameras, individual servers on very large systems. Also new in 25.6, we have some audit logging improvements. Orchid Recorder's audit logging system, we try and treat as something that is sort of sacrosanct. We're really sticklers about making sure that anything that can possibly alter the state of the system is recorded in the Orchid audit logs. And we discovered that the Fusion bulk licensing system, so where you can go in Fusion, I'll show you that here, where you can go in Fusion to apply bulk licenses to individual recorders here in this dialog. If you received a bundle of licenses from IP Configure and then applied those licenses through this dialog, those changes to the Orchid license would not appear in the Orchid audit logs. So that was a gap that we needed to fix, and that was fixed in 25.6. A lot of small bug fixes in Fusion and Hybrid 25.6 as well. You can find those in the full release notes on our website. And we also changed the default web server port for Orchid Fusion to port 8080 on Windows. Previously, the Orchid Fusion and the Orchid Recorder port were both defaulting to port 80 on Windows. So if you were a Windows user and you wanted to install both Orchid Recorder and Orchid Fusion to test out on the same system, you would have a port conflict unless you changed both of those. So we've changed the default so that does not happen. All right, other improvements in Orchid 25.6. These are more Orchid recorder-centric improvements, so improvements happening on the recording side of things, closer to the cameras. In 25.6, Orchid Recorder and Orchid Fusion and Hybrid now support ALAW audio within the G711 audio codec. So G711 audio, very common in security cameras, and there's really two main variants of G711. There is a variant called MuLaw, very common in North America, and there is a less common variant called ALAW, more common in European markets. Orchid has supported the MuLaw variant of G711 for many years. We discovered an issue with our ALAW G711 support, so that has now been corrected, and ALAW G711 audio is now available in Orchid 25.6. Again, that's mostly for customers in European markets. In 25.6, we've also made some licensing improvements for Orchid recorders running in Docker containers. So Orchid has a licensing system where when you apply a license to Orchid, that license gets tied to the Orchid recorder server. And the licensing system in Orchid does that by looking at a number of sort of variables that exist on the server, looks at things like hard drive serial numbers and MAC addresses, amongst other things, of network interfaces. Docker containers often include a bunch of ephemeral virtual MAC addresses, so network interface addresses that can change every time the Docker container is restarted. And that became a licensing headache for some Orchid users that we've heard from who are trying to run Orchid Recorder in Docker containers. Every time they redeploy the Docker container or it restarted, the Orchid license would become invalid because those addresses changed. New in 25.6, Orchid is a little bit more intelligent about trying to distinguish between a MAC address that's actually a physical network interface versus an ephemeral virtual MAC address like might be provided in a Docker container. And in 25.6, we ignore those virtual MAC addresses so that your license will not become invalidated in a Docker container. Let's see. Also in 25.6, we improved the CPU usage for Orchid's Smart Search feature. So I'm sure you're familiar, but just in case you're not, Orchid Smart Search is a motion detection feature within Orchid, where if I'm looking at a camera, I can enable this Smart Search dialog, draw a box, and we will instantly filter this timeline bar here at the bottom of the screen to only show motion results within that selected region. So we've been really proud of the Smart Search feature based on how basically performance oriented it is. It's a really efficient algorithm that provides nearly instantaneous results. But we found prior to 25.6, the Smart Search database would occasionally get into a state where periodically it would see very high CPU usage, not high enough to affect recordings, not really high enough to affect the performance of the system. But we received feedback from some customers who have Orchid recorders running in spaces like maybe a manager's office, and periodically this Smart Search CPU spike would cause the fans in the server to get really loud, which obviously is very annoying. So we made some improvements in 25.6 to reduce those CPU usage spikes and keep everybody's fans quiet. And then finally, new in 25.6, we have automatic detection of AV1 video on Axis cameras. So IPconfigure recently introduced support for the latest generation AV1 video codec. Currently, that AV1 video codec is only available on Axis cameras. It's a great codec, sort of an open source standards-based codec. We expect to see it available for more manufacturers in the future. Currently, it is exclusive to Axis, and in the previous release, Orchid only supported that codec on a specific Axis camera model, the only one that was available at the time. Beginning in 25.6, we now have automated detection of AV1. So any Axis camera that supports AV1 will allow you to now enable that AV1 codec within Orchid. As I mentioned, hopefully in the future, we'll see that from vendors other than Axis as well, although we do like Axis's AV1 support. All right, so that I believe is everything new in 25.6. Our next release is going to be version 25.9, which we should see available towards the end of September. We've got a lot of stuff packed into this 25.9 release. First and foremost, not necessarily an Orchid feature, but something that we will see available from IPconfigure is we have a access control integration that's coming out. Obviously, we'll give you a lot more information on that once it is available, but we're developing a video plugin for access control, looking at different providers. We're trying to build this in sort of a generic way, but we are working for a specific access control integration now. It'll allow you to view Orchid video, get the full Orchid user experience within that access control system. Next, probably the biggest feature in 25.9 is Orchid's AI engine is due to be released in September. So Orchid AI, it's based around either CPU or GPU compute. Whether you're using CPU or GPU is definitely going to determine sort of the number of cameras, the resolution of video that you're going to be able to perform AI operations on. But we were taking great pains to make sure that Orchid AI is available even without a GPU on a limited number of cameras. And in 25.9, we will have AI-supported object detection in Orchid. So this is going to be a feature that's available within the Orchid Smart Search interface, except when you draw a box inside Smart Search, instead of detecting just motion, we'll be able to detect from a number of different objects, things like vehicles, people, particular items of clothing, that sort of thing. So really just the start of where we're headed with Orchid AI. It's been something that we've been working on for a while now, but we're finally ready to talk about it in a small way, and we will see the first version of it available in 25.9. Much more to talk about in the next release there, obviously, but something we're really excited about. Also in 25.9, we will have a advanced export player available in Orchid. So Orchid has a number of ways to export video. I can download individual video clips. I can move those clips to the Orchid library. But once I pull that video outside of Orchid and take it somewhere else, maybe take it to a courtroom, pass it off to law enforcement, users have told us that they really need a way to bring those individual video clips from different cameras together and play them back in a single interface with the video synchronized, just like you get in the Orchid user interface. So in 25.9, we will have that available. So we will have a mechanism whereby users can download multiple video clips at once from Orchid, get a single bundle, and then we will have a standalone export player that will run on Windows, Mac, and Linux, support sort of the full suite of Orchid features, things like dewarp. Our timeline bar will be there. The user interface will look very, very similar to the web-based version of Orchid, but this will be an entirely offline player that you can use to view those exported video clips. So again, something users have been asking for recently, and something we're happy to provide. So that will certainly be in 25.9. As we get farther down this list, we're moving into features that are definitely under development, perhaps more likely to be in our 25.12 release, closer to the end of the year, though. But we are working on frame-by-frame playback within Orchid. We're working on AArch 64 installers for Orchid Fusion. AArch is the 64-bit version of ARM. So these are CPUs that you often find in large data centers, AWS, Google Cloud Platform. They have 64-bit ARM servers that can run applications like Fusion. Previously, we have a 32-bit version of Fusion for ARM. We will soon have a 64-bit version. And then Orchid's events, triggers, and action system that we've been talking about for a while, still under active development. We're going to see some user-facing components of that events, triggers, and action system soon. Certainly this year, perhaps in 25.9, if not then in 25.12. And we will see that increasingly integrated with Orchid AI, our new AI capabilities. All right, so that is everything new in 25.6. A little bit of a sneak peek on what we have coming soon in the 25.9 release and also later this year. Just as a reminder, IP Configure has a bunch of really good training documentation on Orchid VMS available at training.ipconfigure.com. We have detailed manuals for Orchid VMS. We've got a fantastic US-based support team that operates here out of our office in Norfolk, Virginia. You can get to them by phone or ticket system at the links here on this slide. And that is all I have for today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me and hope to see you again in September or early October for the 25.9 release presentation. All right, thanks a lot.